Okay, so what I did is I took the LTI starter app and I created another example of how to build a content item. So a content item will let you insert content into the learning management system in any one of a number of different places. And in this example, the tool will be installed in the rich text editor inside of Canvas. It will also be available under assignments and in one other place. I can't remember. I'll show you when we look at the XML config. So let's see. I'm trying to figure out the best place to start. I've got this content items controller. I've added that in addition to the LTI launches controller. So I think when we've chatted in the past, there's been this idea of an LTI launch, and that happens through this controller. What the content item selection does is it allows you to build an LTI tool that also permits an administrator or an instructor or a TA, somebody who has some admin level of access inside of a course, the opportunity to select a piece of content that is going to be inserted into the learning management system. And you can insert in a number of different ways. For example, you can make it an LTI launch. So you have an LTI tool that's providing a link that will do an LTI launch. You can also just provide the content, just the HTML for the content. You can embed it in an iframe. There's just a number of different opportunities. So, so that's why we've got this content items controller. So I went ahead and added it to the routes. I've already written all the code. It would be better if I showed us building the code, but hopefully I can walk through this and have it make sense. I've got this content items defined as a resource. We have to be able to do a post to the index because the learning management system is going to do an LTI launch to the index page. And so that has to be able to take a post because the LTI launches are done via a post. I've also added this setup method to content items. And so we'll go back and talk through those. So the setup method right here, what that does is it allows you to get the configuration XML that you'll need to install the tool into the learning management system. So it will respond to both HTML and XML, and I'll show you what that looks like. Bring that, got it right here. So you can see I've used the atomic Jolt XYZ domain. I've got content item example as my subdomain. Content item / setup will give me this HTML page. And just really quick, you don't have to remember that URL. If you just go to the home page, there's a link. We've done a really, really basic application. There's no styling whatsoever because we don't really need to add it until we know what the problem is, what the user interface needs to look like. So just click on Content Item LTI XML Configuration. Oh, it'll take me to an error page. Takes me to the setup. I'll go fix that. Actually, let's just fix that right now. Index, content items, setup path. Go back, make sure that I did this correctly. No, I did not. It's the other way. Setup content items path. Okay, now we have the correct path there. Now when I click on it, here's the page that will give me what I need to go out and set up these tools. You can see I've got two different LTI tools installed. For the sake of this example, it doesn't matter which one you use. We just need a key and a secret. So we'll copy and paste those over and go install it into Canvas here in one second. This is the XML that handles the configuration. And by the way, the two different formats mean that I can type .xml and I'll get just the XML for the configuration if we need that for some reason. All right, so walking through this setup, what this does is here's your title and your description. So they're the same because you don't need anything any more sophisticated. The launch URL is going to be the root domain of the site. And then all of these are extensions. And so we define the canvas.instructure.com extensions. Let's see, then we've got privacy levels public so everybody can access it. We might want to change that to admin. So this is where all the where the tool will be available inside a learning management system. So under assignment selection, link selection, and as an editor button. And we'll probably focus for the most part on the editor button. So to install this, I go to my course, and I go to settings. Eventually I go to settings. There we go. All right, view app configurations. And I actually have it installed, so I'm going to delete it just so I can show the install process. Wipe that out. And now we're going to add a new LTI application. We're going to choose paste XML. And this is going to be the content item selector example. Now I can use, like say, either of the keys. So I'm going to grab the LTI starter app as my LTI key. I get so used to toggling between windows. Grab the secret right here, which you normally wouldn't want to put your LTI key in secret, like just on any old web page, but this is just an example app, so we don't care. But don't leave that code in there. Drop that shared secret there. And now I can grab this XML configuration, drop that into here, and save it. All right, so it says app was added. And if I refresh the page, it should show up. Actually, it won't show up in the sidebar. Sorry. Refreshing the page doesn't do it any good because we didn't install it as a navigation item. We installed it like as an editor button. So I have to go somewhere where we can use the editor. So I'm going to go to Pages. Sorry, I get so used to building navigation tools that I forget. Now if I click Edit this page, let's get rid of some of that. You can see that there is this new button called LTI right here, and it says Content Item Example. So that's the tool that we just installed. And the reason it has that LTI icon is because in the XML configuration, there's this field right here that says property name, canvas icon class, icon-LTI, and I think Canvas just has that built in. So if you just give it that value, you'll get this default LTI icon. You can also add any icon that you'd like. So usually you'll have your designers come up with something that's appropriate for your project. But for this default icon works. Okay, so now when I click this, I'm going to get this screen. And it says select an item. And I've put two example items in here, IM1 and IM2. All right, so to get to this point, let's talk about the code that's required to show this. What that LTI launch did is it launches this index method of my controller. It does a post, and then it passes all of the various LTI values over. Now, in this example, I didn't bother to check for the LTI validity, but we probably should make sure that it's a valid LTI launch using, let's see, LTI support. This do LTI right here. Actually, what we can do is just grab this piece of code right there. So we'll add a new before filter, and we'll say, I don't know, do, no, we already used do LTI. Secure launch. And then I'll need a method down here called secure launch. Take that and just put it down here at the bottom. And that's going to return a true or a false based on whether or not this is a valid request. And I think that is sufficient. Now, let's do this. We'll add in the user not authorized. So if it's not a valid LTI request, we'll get user not authorized. And then that'll return a valid 404 and whatnot. Okay, so let's go make sure that I didn't just break this. And if I did, we're just going to remove it and I'll go debug it later. But it looks like that's defined. So I need to include this LTI support concern. I think pretty sure that's where we define valid LTI request. It is. It's right there. Okay, so now let's try again. Okay, there we go. Now we've made sure that the LTI request is valid, just with a couple of lines of code. So it's nice that you can easily reuse this this concern. Whoops, right here. Reuse the concern here, so that you can secure the launch and whatnot. Okay, so now that we've gotten past that check, the next check that we're going to do is we only want to do this check on the index too. So I'm going to put only on index because we don't want to do it on this show method, and you'll see why here in just a little bit. So check is content item. So check is content item is going to make sure that let's see right here. There's the method. It's going to make sure that the LTI request has an LTI message type of content item selection request. If it doesn't have that, it means that something has not been configured correctly inside of the learning management system. So the user may have attempted to install it as a navigation tool, for example, and in that case, it's just not going to work correctly. So we want to make sure that the tool is installed correctly, and that check, this check right here, ensures that that's the case. So the LTI request should contain content item selection request. All right, so that handles all of the different checks that we need to make. So then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at the different kinds of media types. So if the media type is a text HTML, then we're just going to embed this in iframe. Otherwise, we're going to do an LTI launch. Now the reason that we do that is that, well, because I defined it that way. And so I had another friend help me out with an example here. You could, if the media type is text HTML, you could just return the text HTML. You don't have to iframe it. So maybe all you need to do is select an image, in which case there's not a lot of point to iframing an image to display it in a learning management system. You could just give it the URL of the image, or maybe the URL of a video, or maybe it's a tool to select a YouTube video, and you could give it the embed codes for the YouTube video. So there's a lot of different options. This is just an example. This is not like part of a standard or something that you have to do. It's just what I did for this example. Okay, so the next piece here, you'll see that I get these content items, and where does that come from? Well, I just cheated, and in the application controller, I've defined content items because I didn't want to add a bunch of stuff to the database. So there's just two items in here. They have ID 1 and 2, and their names are IM1 and IM2. Super simple. They're in the application controller so that multiple controllers could access it, just for the sake of brevity as we write the example code. Okay, so let me close that. So here we are. We now have that array of items, and then we're going to render with the client layout. The reason I chose to render with the client layout is it's an empty layout. It doesn't have any navigation, and that's important for displaying here, because if you don't render without any navigation, then all of your Chrome and your navigation is going to show up around the select item, and that's probably not what you want. So at the end of the day, you're just going to render this one page. So if I go find the index HTML that corresponds to the content items, it's going to be right here. Here's the select item. Just for demonstration, I'm going to change that to say select content item. So now it'll say select content item in that pop-up. We're going to iterate over each of those items, and we're just going to generate a link for those items. And that link is going to come back to the content item, which will take us back to the exact same controller. It's just going to be the show method on the controller. So sorry, I'm going to close some of these tabs just for now. Close that tab. There we go. So this link right here is going to land us on this show method right here. You can just return directly to the LMS right here. You don't have to necessarily link back into your system, but for this example, we're going to. And it's a little bit easier to do it this way, I think. So we're going to link to the item. Here's the item's name, IM1. It's going to go to the content item path, which is going to be the show method of our content items controller. It's going to use this, the ID, So if you look inside of there, you can see the ID. Well, you probably can't see the ID. The ID for that is going to be 1. It's showing up in the status bar at the very bottom of the screen, but that's really not very helpful. The return URL is provided to us by the LTI launch. It's content item return URL. So when the learning management system launches out to the third-party tool, the content provider, or the tool provider that we're building here, it's going to give you a URL where you will provide it with data. So it says, hey, when the user is done, when they've selected the item that they're going to use, here's the URL that you need to call me back on. So send me back the user selection of that URL. The return type is something for our end, so because we look at the 2 different return types, either the iframe or the LTI embed. And then the OAuth consumer key, again, is for our system. Every call up into the LTI starter app is going to need that key so that it can figure out which application you're running. And in this case, it's going to look up the current LTI application instance using the OAuth consumer key. And I can show you where it's going to do that right here, because that's what current LTI application instance requires. So it'll use the LTI key, and then we can pull the LTI key off of that instance as well as the appropriate secret. Okay. So any questions up to that point?
Yeah, so you're showing the Ruby index HTML, but is there a way to link to the React page?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Would you do that?
Yes. So if you want to use React code here, I would probably still, well, it depends. We could use the LTI launches controller and use the index page off of that controller, or we can just add React code inside of here. So if I go down to the LTI launches, here's everything that we need for Webpack to do its thing to insert the JavaScript code. So I could also do that here and insert it. And then I would probably want to pick a different application name. So you can see that each, the way the app is set up, the intention is for each application instance to have its own associated JavaScript application. But if we didn't want to do that, what we could do here is just say plus content item selector or something like that. Now, if I do this, then I need to go into my JavaScript into the client folder and add that everywhere that we're going to add it. So I'll show you where to add it here in just 1 second. So this client application name is going to be, it's going to just be app. So this is going, let's call it app underscore content item selector. So now if I go into the client directory, go into the JS folder, add a new file, app underscore content item selector.jsx. So just for the sake of brevity, I'm just going to copy what's in app.jsx and just paste it in so that we have a valid React application. And now I'm going to go into settings.js. It's in client config settings. And I'm going to add that right here. So this just makes sure that Webpack knows to build this new JavaScript application. So it'll be app underscore content item selector, and it's going to be in the JS app content item selector directory. Now, I don't think I have the JavaScript running, so let's make sure that we've done everything correctly with the JavaScript. Okay. So now going back to this page, this is going to add the styles to the head of the document that were generated by Webpack. It's going to add all of our default client settings. It's going to add that manifest script. It's going to add this one div, main-app, and this guy is going to be rendered into main-app. This stuff should still show up on the page. for now. So let's just see how we did. Okay, so there we go. So you can see that it rendered the default React application, which just shows the Atomic Jolt logo. So now you would do this if you want to have a really sophisticated tool for picking which items the users can choose from. So maybe this React application makes a whole bunch of calls and provides the user with a really nice interface right here that helps them to search and filter down to the exact item that they want. So that would be a good reason to have the React application in place. I'll go ahead and leave this code here so that we have both examples. Just really quickly, I'll finish walking through this, this example, and then maybe we can talk about how we would take this, the ideas behind this code and bring them into the React application. So right now, all that's going to happen is I'm going to click one of these links, and it's going to go to the content items controller show method, which is this guy right here. It's going to go into that content items array, right? It's just hard-coded data. Normally, you'd probably have an active record model and go find it there. Or maybe you would have an Elasticsearch instance that it would go and find the object from there, or a Mongo database, or maybe it makes a third-party API call because you're integrating your campus with some big content repository that they have a license to or something. I mean, there are a lot of different options right here. So basically, it boils down to, in this index method, you show the user what those options are. And you can show it to them either using simple standard Ruby on Rails kinds of behaviors where I get a collection of stuff and I render the stuff, or you can build really sophisticated user interfaces using React that might call back into the Rails server and make API calls to get more data and provide them with a much richer experience. Then the next step is return the user's selection to the learning management system. So this show method does that. If I was building a React application, I probably wouldn't have this show method at all. I would just do it in the React application, which would require passing down just a little bit more information. This is just easier to show really quickly, right? So clicking that link lands on this show. It grabs me an item. That item has, the link has a return type of either iframe or LTI launch that was established, here in the index method and then rendered into the view. This is the interesting part. I'm going to create a consumer, an instance of a tool consumer. I need the current application instance's LTI key and secret to do that. I'm going to grab that return URL out of the params. So that return URL came to me from the learning management system, was rendered into the page. The user clicked one of the selections. That selection still had that return URL as part of it, and now I can provide that in my configuration as the launch URL. So we're going to do a launch back to the tool consumer and provide them with the selection. All right, so I'm going to set the configuration to that tool consumer configuration. I don't actually need a real resource link ID. I can just put anything I want there. So, it's a fake ID. Should put something like not 21. We'll just leave it fake ID. LTI message type is content item selection. So we're going back to the learning management system and telling them that. And then the content items, see the set non-spec param. I think that this library was probably, well, I know it was finished before some of the newer LTI specs were done, so it probably just doesn't have it built in, or they probably just decided, hey, this is good enough. Just set the content items part of that LTI launch back to the tool consumer using content items right here, and we just call to JSON on that. So let me show you what that JSON looks like. So that comes from this method call right here. So I'm going to call down to content item hash, but before that I have to generate the content right here. So this is kind of an interesting part and probably the most relevant. So let's talk about the embed iframe and the LTI launch. There are methods down here. Here's the LTI launch. Here's the embed iframe. So we'll talk about that one first. This piece of code is could return anything. It could return just plain old HTML. In fact, it does return HTML right here. But I could put the HTML to embed a YouTube video. I could put the source tag of an image. I can really put any HTML here that I want. We're just going to put in an iframe and say, here's your URL. So just for simplicity's sake, I created an items resource, an item resource. So there's an items controller. It just has a simple show method. Let's go grab it. Here's the items controller. There's the show method. Once again, it just goes to that fake array of items. It finds the item that you're requesting and then just displays it. It displays its name. That's all it's going to do. So super simple controller. But that's the URL that the iframe is going to load. Here's the JSON. Well, here's the Ruby object that's going to get turned into JSON, but it looks a lot like JSON. It's going to get sent back to the tool consumer, and they're going to be able to take this and display it in the learning management system. So you can see its type is content item. It's a text HTML. The text that we're going to return is this iframe text, which comes from this right here. And then it has placement advice, which says we want to be embedded in the target document. Up here, there's also the opportunity to do an LTI launch. So if you need something more sophisticated than just stick this HTML in the document, we can do that through the LTI launch. Here's the JSON that's required to do that. I think that this will also, if I remember correctly, embed itself as an assessment type so that when this LTI launch occurs, you'll get an outcomes write back URL that we talked about previously when we talked about outcomes. So it'll launch and let you write back into the gradebook, which is cool. Okay, so that's what content is. It's going to be one of those two items. So if you look up here, content is either the embed iframe or it's the LTI launch. For the most part, for the examples that we're showing, it's just going to be this embed iframe because we're not doing the LTI tool piece right now. So we're going to take that content and now we have to further embed it in another Ruby object. And all we're doing is building up that final JSON document. So this content item hash is this guy right here. So all it does is it says, here's the context. The context is this IMS global content item. So hey, it tells the LMS, hey, this is a content item. And here's the items, which were the other piece of JSON that we were putting together by putting together a Ruby object. Okay, so now I have this content items, and that's what I called toJSON on, and that's what gets embedded in the response, or in this case, it's going to be a post request, I think, back to the learning management system. Okay, any questions up to that point? Is that terribly confusing, or?
It seems really excessive. But no, I'm following.
Yeah, it's a standard, right? Yeah,
It's a funny standard.
Yeah. I mean, I understand why they do it. It's for security. It's for interoperability. So yeah, some of this stuff we could do. Everything that's happening here in this show method and the corresponding activity that will happen here in the HTML, we could actually do in the React application. But this is just simple, so that's, well, I won't say it's simple, but it was easier to do it this way. So let me keep going on and show you why. So I have this consumer object now, and that's going to render the show method. So let's go look here. When I click this, that show method gets rendered, which is going to say retrieving content. Now you see this big gray box that sits inside of here. That's because it's an iframe, and the rich media editor doesn't know how to display the iframe. I guess it does. It could, but it's not going to show the contents. It's just going to put this little, well, this big gray box in there. I hit save. And now there's the text that it's going to output. The way that it does that, when we actually click that link, here's the show method. We talked about here's the show view. We talked about the method just a second ago. And this probably should not be in there because it's going to render with a layout. It generates this form for us, and then it uses some JavaScript to automatically submit the form. So this is why I say we don't actually need the show method. We could do that another way. Like, for example, we could take and render this form in our React application, and then when the user clicks the button to select the item, at that point we could submit this form, right? Like you could just do a normal form post out. The complicated part is this. So the consumer object has this generate launch data that we can iterate over. Now that part is going to be more complicated to do in the React application, because instead of relying on a piece of code that somebody else wrote, you have to do it yourself. And so that's why this is nicer and it's simpler, because I can just use this consumer object to do that for me. Let me show you what it generates. So I'm going to not submit the form automatically. That'll allow us to inspect it and we can see the HTML that it generates. Okay, so when I click this guy, it's going to open up our index again. Now I'm going to click one of these, and I get this screen, which is never going to go away now because I told it to not go away. But that's okay. So here is the HTML that is generated. Here's our list of, no, that's not it. It's in here. Here's our items right here. Okay, so make this as big as I can. Okay, so here's that form, and here are all the key value pairs that were generated for us. So you can see that it adds the consumer key, it adds a signature method, adds a timestamp, adds a nonce, sorry. And here's that content items. Here's the JSON that was generated that tells the learning management system where to put the content that we're returning. There's the message type. We added that. That you can see there's the fake ID. And here's the OAuth signature. So in order to do this client side in a React application, you will probably have to write an API method that will return these values to you, because the client won't have the LTI secret, right? So because of that, well, yeah, I think that's how you'd want to do it. So I imagine that you'd have some, let's close this up, some really cool interface right here at this point. That's kind of what we talked about. And then when I click one of these things to select it and have it be embedded, at that moment you would call to the learning management system and you would ask it to generate all of those key value pairs for you right here. And then you would provide that to the client to be rendered into a form, which it would then submit automatically to the learning management system. So a couple more steps, sorry. A couple more steps that would be required, but you'll end up with a much better user experience overall. So any questions to that point?
No, that's great. Yeah, it's amazing. Thank you so much.
You bet.